My son stood up at a crowded restaurant and called me a loser to my face. His mother, my ex-wife, said nothing. Her new husband just smirked. I didn't say a word either. I just went home. And by the following Monday, I had started the process of taking back everything I ever gave my son. The car he drove, the penthouse he lived in, and the company he thought he built. He was about to learn that a loser like me built his entire world, and a loser like me could tear it all down. My name is Reginald Covington, and at 72 years old, I've learned that silence has many shades. There's the silence of peace, the silence of understanding, and the most dangerous silence of all, the one you use to muffle the roar inside. That night at a restaurant called the Gilded Fork, I was using the third kind. This place was Richard Lawson's territory. He was my ex-wife Brenda's new husband. Everything about it was polished and tastelessly expensive, from the crystal chandeliers that hung like glass jellyfish to the clinking of silver against porcelain. Richard chose it, of course. It was a stage, and tonight it seemed I was the main attraction. My old suit, a Hart Schaffner Marx I'd owned for 20 years, was perfectly tailored and immaculate, but it felt out of place in this sea of silk and cashmere. It was a suit of quality, not of flash. And in my son Andre's world, there was no room for anything that didn't flash. I could feel his eyes on me and those of his wife, Brittany. They weren't looking at me. They were assessing me. Every time I took a sip of water, I saw Brittany's brow furrow slightly, as if the way I held my glass was further proof of my failure. Andre was busier. He was performing. He leaned back in his velvet-upholstered chair, one arm draped casually over the back, the other swirling a glass of red wine. It was a gesture he'd copied from Richard. "The company is exploding," Richard Andre announced, his voice loud enough for the next table to glance over. "We just closed our second round of funding. Investors are lining up. Brittany's right, it's probably time I upgrade the 5 Series to a 7 Series. Brittany let out a little glassy laugh. "You deserve it, honey. You've worked so hard." I remained silent. I knew all about that second round of funding. I knew exactly where every single dollar came from, and it certainly wasn't from the line of investors Andre was imagining. Brenda, my ex-wife, sat there with a tight smile plastered on her face. She had changed. 5 years with Richard had worn away the practical woman I once knew, replacing her with a pale imitation who worried if her handbag was last season. She looked at Richard with an adoring gaze, as if he had personally invented success. "Our son is brilliant, isn't he, Reggie?" she asked, turning to me, but it wasn't a question. It was a statement, a silent comparison. "Our son is brilliant, unlike you." I just gave a slight nod and brought a piece of steak to my mouth. It was cooked perfectly, but I tasted nothing. All my senses were focused on the play unfolding before me. Richard, having let Andre have his monologue, finally spoke in his deep, patronizing tone. "Ambition is everything, Andre. Your father Reggie is a good man, a fine engineer, but he lacks that spark. He builds things for other people, never an empire for himself. In this world, if you're not building, you're being buried." It was an insult wrapped in a backhanded compliment, a technique men like Richard perfected. Andre nodded eagerly, like a devout follower hearing a sermon. "Exactly. I've tried to explain that to Dad so many times. The importance of taking risks, of building a personal brand. But he just talks about savings and safe investments. It's so dated." Dated was the word he used. Last time it was cautious. The time before that, traditional. The words changed, but the contempt never did. The dinner continued a steady stream of boasts. Andre talked about their penthouse apartment with its city views, their upcoming vacation to Bali, the new watch Brittany had bought him. Every story was a stone thrown into my silence. I was the wall they were bouncing their achievements off of just to hear the sound they made. Finally, as dessert was served, a 7-layer chocolate cake that likely cost more than my monthly utility bill, Richard signaled the waiter. "The check, please. On my account." He said it casually, but his eyes flickered toward me. Another performance of power. That was the breaking point. Andre, maybe from the wine or maybe just high on his own arrogance, suddenly stood up. His chair scraped harshly against the floor. A few diners at nearby tables turned to look. "See?" Andre said, his voice ringing out in the opulent room. He gestured from Richard to me. "That's the difference. Dad, you're a loser. You've spent your whole life in that dusty old house on those dirty construction sites." Then he turned to Richard, his voice full of admiration. "Richard is not. He's a winner." The air went thick. Brittany nodded smugly, as if her husband had just spoken a great truth. Brenda stared down at her plate, her silence a final act of betrayal. Even the people at the next table quickly looked away, their feigned ignorance a testament to my public humiliation. I looked directly into Andre's eyes. For a split second I saw a flicker of the little boy I taught to ride a bike, a hint of regret. But it was buried too deep beneath layers of designer clothes and entitlement. I said nothing. The rage I expected to feel never came. In its place was a cold, sharp clarity, a terrifying certainty. It was over. The final thread had snapped. Slowly I placed my white linen napkin on the table beside my untouched cake. I stood up. My chair made no noise. My movements were deliberate, measured. I glanced at Brenda, at Richard, and finally at Andre. Then, without a word, I turned and walked out of the restaurant. The heavy wooden door closed behind me, cutting off the sound, leaving them to their hollow victory. I didn't have to say anything. My actions were about to speak for me. The air outside was cold, but it cleared my head. I didn't hail a cab. I walked. The wealthy Atlanta neighborhood slowly gave way to the quieter, more familiar streets of my own. My house stood under the shadow of an old oak tree, a solid 2-story brick home I'd designed and helped build myself 30 years ago. It wasn't flashy. It was durable. Like me. Inside, everything was in order. The smell of old mahogany and the paper from the books lining my shelves filled the air. This was my sanctuary, a world away from the phoniness I had just left behind. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't pour myself a drink. Anger clouds judgment, and tonight I needed to be colder than ice. I went into my study. It was a small room, but everything in it had a purpose. On the walls were blueprints of bridges and buildings I had helped create. Real things. Things that last. On a corner of the desk there was a silver-framed photograph. Andre, aged 5, wearing an oversized plastic construction helmet, grinning on my shoulders at a job site. His eyes then were full of pure pride and love. Where did I lose that boy? The question hit me not as a sharp pain, but as a dull, weary ache that had been building for years. I had been too quiet. I had hoped my unconditional love would be enough. I was wrong. Unconditional love does not mean unconditional sacrifice. Tonight, the sacrificing ended. I sat down in my worn leather chair and turned on my old, slightly slow but reliable Dell desktop. The screen glowed, illuminating my impassive face. I didn't browse the web or check my personal emails. My fingers moved with practiced ease, opening an encryption program I'd installed years ago. I typed in a long password, a string of letters, numbers, and symbols that no one else on Earth knew. A simple interface appeared on the screen with a list of folders. Their names were meaningless unless you knew what they really were. Covington Holdings, LLC, Oakwood Properties, LLC, AC Tech Solutions. Seed Funding Agreement Project, BMW 7 Series. Lease Contract, Richard Lawson, Consulting. Payment Schedule. Each name was a thread, an invisible thread I had used to weave the world my son now lived, in the world he thought he had created himself. It was like being the engineer of a bridge. You can't see the rebar hidden deep inside the concrete, but without it, the entire structure would collapse. Tonight, I was going to begin a structural integrity test. I opened a secure email client. The recipient was already saved. Alicia Warren, a brilliant attorney, a friend I trusted with my life. Alicia wasn't just my lawyer. She was the architect of the financial fortress I had quietly built. She knew every brick, every number. The email I wrote was short. No pleasantries, no long explanations. She would understand. Subject initiate Sunset Protocol. Body Alicia. We need to meet. Tomorrow morning, your office. 8 a.m. Begin the dissolution process for all assets related to AC and associated parties. Priority 1, the vehicle. Reggie. Sunset Protocol was the name we had given it years ago, a contingency plan for a day just like this. A day when the sun would set on an empire built on a lie. I hit send. A soft whoosh echoed in the silent room. It was done. The first domino was now perched at the edge of the table. I felt no satisfaction, no glee. I just felt a strange, quiet calm. The calm of an engineer who knows his design is about to undergo its final definitive test. I had built Andre's life. Now it was time to see if he could stand on his own once I took the scaffolding away. Alicia Warren's office was on the 45th floor of a glass tower that overlooked Centennial Park. It was the kind of place that smelled of success, a mixture of expensive leather and freshly brewed coffee. But it never intimidated me. In many ways, I had helped build it. Alicia greeted me not with a handshake, but with a familiar, weary smile and a heavy ceramic mug. "Morning, Reggie," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I made the coffee the second I got your email. Black, no sugar. The way you drink it when you mean business." She was right. For 20 years, Alicia had been more than my lawyer. She was my strategist, my confidant, the keeper of my secrets. She was the only person on earth who knew the full extent of the financial fortress I had built. I took the mug, the heat warming my cold hands. "Thank you, Alicia." She gestured to one of the plush leather chairs opposite her enormous oak desk. She didn't sit behind it in her seat of power. She sat in the chair next to mine, making us equals. "I'll be honest, Reggie," she said, her sharp eyes studying my face. "When I saw the subject line, Sunset Protocol, my heart sank. I always hoped it was a plan we'd never have to use. I hoped he'd figure it out." I took a slow sip of the dark, bitter coffee. It tasted like resolve. I looked out the window at the sprawling city below, a city I had helped shape with steel and concrete. So did I. "Alicia," I replied, my voice low and even. "But the sun has officially set. It's time to turn off the lights." Alicia nodded slowly, her expression turning from concern to the focused, sharp look of a master chess player seeing the board clearly. "All right, Reggie, walk me through it. I know the legal structures we built, but I need to hear the human part." What was the final straw? I stared into my coffee mug, seeing the reflection of the man my son had called a loser. He said the word Alicia. He said it out loud in public. He called me a loser and called Richard, Brenda's new husband, a winner. And Brenda just sat there and let him. I looked up from the mug and met her eyes. He believes it. He honestly believes the world he lives in is one he created. Today we begin the process of showing him the truth of the foundations he's standing on. Alicia leaned forward, all business now. "Let's review the assets. Let's start with the heart of his so-called empire, AC Tech Solutions." I let out a long, slow breath. Andre always had ambition. I began, my voice a low rumble. I'll give him that. He had big ideas, big dreams. He wanted to be the next Steve Jobs, the next tech mogul from Atlanta. But he had no discipline, no patience, and no money. He came to me about 6 years ago with a half-baked proposal for a software company. It was full of buzzwords and projections that had no basis in reality. I knew if I gave him the money directly, he'd burn through it in a year and learn nothing. I paused, remembering the hopeful, greedy look in his eyes that day. He didn't want a father's guidance. He wanted a bank. So I decided to give him one, just not in the way he expected. I told him I couldn't help that my money was tied up in safe, boring retirement funds. He was so disappointed. He called me old-fashioned. Alicia picked up the narrative, her legal mind filling in the details. And that's when you came to me. We set up the silent trust funded with $2 million based in Delaware for maximum anonymity. Then we created a shell venture capital firm, Innovate Future Group, based out of California. We hired a front man, a retired professor, to be the face of it. As far as Andre knows, he was discovered by a group of forward-thinking West Coast investors who saw his genius. I nodded. He was so proud. He flew to San Francisco, pitched his idea, and walked out with a check. He never once questioned why it was so easy. He thought it was his destiny. He never stopped to wonder who truly owned Innovate Future Group. And the ownership structure of AC Tech Solutions reflects that Alicia continued pulling up a file on her tablet. 60% of the shares are held by Innovate Future Group, which is wholly owned by your anonymous trust. 20% are held by Andre as CEO, and the other 20% are reserved for future employees. You have complete controlling interest, Reggie. He isn't the owner of that company. He is its highest paid employee, and his board of directors is for all intents and purposes you. Next, we move to the symbols of his success. The car, I said the words tasting like ash, the BMW 7 Series. He had to have it. He said it was essential for projecting success to clients and investors. My boy, who used to be happy with a well-maintained Ford, was now convinced the German engineering of his car was a reflection of his own worth. Another easy one, Alicia said, swiping on her screen. He tried to get a lease in his own name, but his personal credit was too thin, so he had the company lease it for him. Or so he thinks. Explain, I said, though I knew the answer perfectly. The lease isn't with AC Tech Solutions, she clarified. It's with a separate entity we created for asset management, Covington Holdings LLC. We presented it to Andre as a third-party fleet management company that AC Tech Solutions would contract with for executive vehicles. He signed the paperwork without a second thought, happy to get his shiny new toy. The contract explicitly states that the vehicle is provided for the use of a designated employee of AC Tech Solutions. The moment he is no longer an employee, the car is no longer his to use, I finished. The irony was corrosive. My holding company, a name he wouldn't even recognize, was providing the chariot for my winner son. He was driving my car paid for with my money, all while calling me a failure. Finally, we came to the biggest piece, the foundation of it all. The penthouse, I said softly. Alicia's expression softened for a moment. This one always felt different, Reggie. It was, I admitted. This was about Brenda as much as it was about Andre. After she left me for Richard, she became obsessed with appearances. She filled Andre's head with the idea that where you live defines who you are. He and Brittany searched for months for the perfect apartment, something that would make their friends jealous. They found the penthouse at the Oakwood. The Oakwood was a beautiful pre-war building that had recently been renovated, a perfect blend of classic architecture and modern luxury. Andre fell in love with it. He told me about it, complaining that it was just out of his price range. He asked if I could help with the security deposit. I told him no, I said to Alicia. I told him it was reckless to live beyond his means. Alicia smiled faintly. And what you didn't tell him was that you had bought the entire building 3 years prior. It was an undervalued asset in a neighborhood that was about to gentrify, I explained, the old engineer in me taking over. The numbers made sense. I purchased it through another LLC, Oakwood Properties. It was a good, solid investment. It was brilliant, Alicia corrected. When Andre applied for the penthouse, the landlord, a property management firm we hired, contacted him with a special offer. They said they were looking for a high-profile tenant like a tech CEO to add prestige to the building, and they were willing to offer him an employee incentive lease. His rent is virtually zero. He just pays the building fees. He signed it, bragging for weeks that the landlord was so impressed with him that he got the deal of a lifetime. He never read the fine print, I said. No one ever does, Alicia confirmed. The fine print, of course, states that the incentive lease is contingent on his continued employment with AC Tech Solutions. It also states that the property management firm can terminate the lease with 72 hours notice for any breach of contract, and the contract defines a breach as anything that might bring the building's name into disrepute. So there it was, the whole house of cards laid out on Alicia's expensive oak desk. His company, his car, his home. Every pillar of his life was a carefully constructed illusion, designed, funded, and owned by the father he called a loser. He wasn't a self-made man. He was a trust fund baby who had never been told the truth. He has nothing, Alicia, I said, the weight of the words settling in the room. Everything he thinks is his is actually mine. Alicia leaned back, her work done for the moment. So, Reggie, what is your first move? According to the protocol, the first step is always symbolic. I thought about the arrogant look on my son's face, the way he gestured with his hand that wore a watch I'd paid for, driving a car I owned to go home to an apartment I provided. The car, I said without hesitation. We start with the car. A winner shouldn't have to ride the bus. Alicia made a note on her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. The car it is, she confirmed, her voice now devoid of any emotion except professional focus. A tow truck can be dispatched to his residence by 9 a.m. Monday morning, citing the termination of the corporate lease agreement. It will be swift and entirely legal. But what's the larger strategy, Reggie? What's the timeline? Do we hit him with everything at once? The car, the corporate accounts, the eviction notice? We can have it all done by noon on Monday if you want. A full-scale blitz. I shook my head slowly, looking past her out at the skyline I knew so well. No, I said. That's not the way. That's destruction. That's revenge. And this isn't about revenge. What is it about? Then, she asked gently. I turned my gaze back to her, trying to find the right words. I thought about my life's work, about the physics of structures and the integrity of foundations. When you need to bring down a building, Alicia, you don't just set off dynamite at the base. That's messy, unpredictable. It sends shrapnel everywhere and hurts innocent people. It's an act of pure destruction. I leaned forward, my hands clasped in front of me. A true engineer, a builder, does it differently. You perform a controlled demolition. You dismantle it piece by piece. You remove the fixtures first, the shiny things that catch the eye. Then you take out the windows, his view of the world. Then you carefully remove the floors one by one until all that's left is the empty frame and the bare foundation. I don't want to destroy my son, Alicia. I want to dismantle the false life he's living. I want him to stand on the cold, hard foundation of reality and finally understand what it takes to build something real for himself. Alicia listened, her eyes never leaving mine. She understood. She wasn't just my lawyer, she was the daughter of a carpenter. She knew the language of building and breaking, a controlled demolition. She repeated, a new understanding dawning in her expression. It's legally cleaner, too. Each action is a separate, justifiable corporate or property management decision. No single action can be construed as a coordinated personal attack. It's airtight. Exactly, I said. So we start with the car on Monday. The symbol of his status, we give him a day to feel that loss, to feel the inconvenience. Then on Tuesday, you freeze the corporate accounts. You cut off his power. Let him feel what it's like when the well runs dry. And Richard Lawson's consulting payments along with it. Let the winner feel the pinch too. I took a deep breath before delivering the final instruction. Then on Wednesday, when he's confused and powerless, you deliver the eviction notice. You take away his security, one piece at a time. Let him feel each wall come down. Let him understand the value of each thing as he loses it. A heavy silence settled in the room. This wasn't a plan born of anger. It was a curriculum, a harsh, painful curriculum. Alicia simply nodded. I understand the lesson plan, Reggie. I'll prepare the necessary documents immediately. I stood up, my old bones aching with a weariness that had nothing to do with age. I had made the decision. Now I just had to live with it. Thank you, Alicia. I walked to the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. Let it begin, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Let the lesson commence. The rest of that week was perhaps the quietest of my life. After leaving Alicia's office, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The decision had been made. The plan was in motion. There was nothing left to do but wait for the gears to turn. I spent Friday and Saturday in my garden. My rose bushes needed pruning, a task I usually enjoyed, but now took on with a new solemn purpose. My hands, calloused from a lifetime of work, moved with practiced precision. Snip, a dead branch fell away. Snip, an overgrown shoot that was taking nutrients from the main stem. I thought about what I was doing. Gardening is an exercise in ruthless compassion. You can't be sentimental about the parts of a plant that are weak or diseased. If you let them grow, they will eventually poison the whole bush. You have to cut them back sometimes almost to the stalk to give the plant a chance to grow back stronger, healthier. You do it not out of anger, but out of a desire for the plant to reach its full potential. My son was a magnificent plant that had become overgrown with the weeds of entitlement and arrogance. I was just the gardener doing the hard, necessary work. On Saturday afternoon, my phone buzzed on the small wooden bench beside me. I picked it up. Andre's name glowed on the screen. A week ago, my heart would have leaped. I would have answered immediately, ready to absorb whatever casual disrespect he threw my way just to hear his voice. Now I simply looked at his name. I watched it flash again and again, a desperate digital cry. Then I placed the phone face down on the bench and went back to my roses. An hour later, it buzzed again. This time it was Brenda. I didn't even bother to look. Her silence at the dinner table had been her answer. My silence was now mine. That evening I sat in my worn leather armchair, a place I had spent countless hours reading. I wasn't reading a thriller or a mystery. I was rereading a biography of Ulysses S. Grant, not the general but the president, a man who was quiet, underestimated, and constantly battling the corruption of those around him. I came across a passage about his steadfastness, his ability to absorb blows and criticism without flinching all while focusing on the larger strategic goal. He wasn't flashy. He was solid. He dealt not in opinions, but in outcomes. I closed the book and thought about the word Andre had used. Loser. He saw my quiet life, my modest home, my old car, and he saw a man who had lost at the game of life. He never saw the foundations. He never understood that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest. He, Brenda, and Richard were playing a game of checkers, making loud, obvious moves. They never realized I was playing chess, quietly positioning my pieces for a checkmate that was decided 10 moves ago. Sunday was even quieter. I attended church, the same one I'd been going to for 40 years. I listened to the sermon on accountability and consequence. I felt a sense of clarity, not guilt. I was holding my son accountable. I was delivering the consequences he had earned. After the service, I spent the afternoon in my workshop sanding down a piece of old oak, the rhythmic motion calming my soul. The phone remained on the kitchen counter, silent now. They had likely given up, assuming I was sulking. They had no idea. As dusk fell, I sat on my back porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the Atlanta sky in shades of orange and purple. The air grew cool. The weekend was over. My final quiet weekend before the storm. I thought of the name Alicia, and I had given the plan the Sunset Protocol. It was fitting. The sun was setting on my son's life as he knew it. And tomorrow morning with the dawn, his harsh, necessary education would begin. I felt no joy, only a profound, heavy certainty. The lesson was coming. I spent my weekend in quiet contemplation. My son, as I would later piece together from a series of frantic voicemails and tearful confessions, spent his in a cacophony of self-congratulation. While I was pruning my roses, he was on the phone with one of his friends, laughing as he drove his BMW down the highway, the city skyline blurring past his window. "Dude, you should have seen his face," Andre had said, his voice booming through the car's Bluetooth speakers. I finally just told him the truth. Called him a loser right to his face. Yeah, he just got up and walked out. Total drama queen. What's he gonna do? You know, he'll get over it. He always does. He'll call in a week acting like nothing happened. He saw my lifetime of patience not as a gift, but as a weakness. He saw my silence not as a warning, but as surrender. That evening, while I was reading about President Grant, Andre and Brittany were in their penthouse scrolling through a website for luxury watches on Brittany's tablet. She had pointed to a gold one with a diamond bezel. "Should I get it, babe?" she'd asked. "It's a little extravagant." Andre, I was told, had scoffed. "Of course you should. We deserve it." Especially after the way my dad acted at dinner. Honestly, I think we need to treat ourselves after that embarrassment. In his mind, he was the victim. My quiet departure was an act of aggression against him, a social faux pas that required retail therapy to overcome. He had no capacity to see his own cruelty. His world was a mirror, and all it showed was his own reflection. He had even called Richard, seeking praise for his brave performance. Richard, ever the opportunist, had supplied it in abundance. "You did the right thing, Andre," the man had said, his voice smooth as oil. "Sometimes you have to set firm boundaries with people from a different generation. People who don't understand the mindset of a winner." "Thanks, Richard." Andre had replied, his voice full of a warmth he hadn't used with me in years. "It's just good to finally have a real role model to look up to." A real role model. A man whose entire consulting business consisted of a single inflated contract with a company I owned. The irony was a bitter pill. Andre had finished that weekend looking out the vast window of his apartment, the city lights spread out beneath him like a carpet of jewels. He was on top of the world he believed he had built. He likely thought of me, the old man in his dusty house, and felt a pang of what he probably mistook for pity. He probably thought, "He'll come around. He has to. He's got nothing else." But he was wrong. I did have something else. I had a plan, and the time for waiting was over. It was Sunday night, 10 p.m. The weekend was done. My house was dark except for the single lamp that cast a warm glow on the oak desk in my study. The quiet in the house was different now. It was no longer the calm after a decision, but the tense electric silence before a storm. The fuse had been lit on Friday, and it had been burning slowly, silently all weekend. Now it was nearing the powder keg. I wasn't pacing. I was sitting in my leather armchair, the biography of Grant resting in my lap, my eyes closed. I was listening, waiting. At precisely 10:01 p.m., a soft chime echoed from my old Dell computer, an email notification. I didn't rush. I took a deep breath, placed my book carefully on the side table, and rose from my chair. I walked to the desk, the wooden floorboards creaking softly under my weight. The screen was bright in the dark room. A single new email sat in my inbox. The sender was Alicia Warren. The subject line was simply "Update." I moved the mouse and clicked it open. The body of the email was stark white, containing only 6 words standing alone in the center of the screen like a military command. I leaned in the reflection of the glowing text visible in my glasses. The first domino has been pushed. Monday morning dawned bright and obnoxious sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse and glinting off the polished chrome of their espresso machine. For Andre, the world felt perfect. The weekend had been a triumph. He had finally put his father in his place, asserting his own status as the family's new alpha. He felt powerful, a feeling amplified by the expensive Italian suit he was putting on and the sleek black BMW 7 Series that was waiting for him in the reserved parking spot in the garage below. Brittany was humming as she applied her makeup, a small, satisfied smile on her face. "Are you sure you don't want me to drive you today, honey?" she asked, looking at his reflection in the mirror. "We could take the Benz. I have that spa appointment at 11. Andre chuckled, adjusting his tie. "Nah, I've got a lunch meeting with some new potential clients. I need to roll up in the Beamer. You know how it is. Image is everything." He leaned in and kissed her on the cheek, the scent of her expensive perfume filling his senses. "Besides," he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I think we've earned the right to show off a little. We're winners, remember?" She giggled and swatted him playfully. "Go on, get out of here, you big shot." Feeling on top of the world, Andre grabbed his leather briefcase and headed for the private elevator that went directly to the residence garage. The ride down was smooth and silent. The doors opened to a pristine, well-lit space, and there it was, his car. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement. Long, low, and gleaming under the fluorescent lights, it was the physical embodiment of his success. He clicked the fob and the car chirped, its angel eye headlights flashing a welcome. But as he walked toward it, he noticed something was wrong. A large, grimy-looking tow truck was parked directly behind his BMW, its yellow hazard lights flashing rhythmically, casting an ugly, pulsating glow on the polished concrete floor. A man in greasy blue overalls was kneeling by his rear tire. Andre's good mood evaporated instantly, replaced by a surge of irritation. "Hey!" he barked, his voice echoing in the garage. "What the hell do you think you're doing? This is a private garage. You can't park here." The man in overalls stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. He was big, with a weathered face and a completely neutral expression. He didn't look impressed. He didn't look intimidated. He just looked tired. "You, Andre Covington?" he asked, his voice a gravelly monotone. "I am," Andre snapped. "And you're about to get your rust bucket towed if you don't move it in the next 10 seconds. You're blocking my car." The man didn't move. Instead, he simply gestured with his thumb toward the back of the BMW. "No, sir, I'm not blocking your car. I'm here to repossess it." The words didn't register at first. They were so absurd, so out of place in his perfect world that his brain refused to process them. He actually laughed, a short, incredulous bark. "Repossess it? You must be joking. This car is paid for. It's a corporate lease. You've obviously got the wrong car, pal." The driver just sighed, as if he'd had this exact conversation 1,000 times. He pulled a clipboard from the cab of his truck and held it out. Work order says black BMW 7 Series license plate, 8 Kilo Victor 391. Belongs to a Mr. Andre Covington. "That you..." Andre's face flushed with anger. This was humiliating. "Yes, that's me, but there's been a mistake. A stupid mistake. Who sent you AC Tech Solutions? Because I own that company, and I can assure you we haven't missed a payment." The driver pointed a greasy finger to a line on the work order. "The order's not from AC Tech, sir. It's from the title holder, a company called Covington Holdings, LLC. Andre stared at the name. Covington Holdings. It meant nothing to him. A surge of relief washed over him, followed by renewed fury. "See, I told you. I've never heard of that company. It's a clerical error. Now get your truck out of here before I call security and have you arrested for trespassing." The driver just shook his head, a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. "Sir, I've got a legally executed repossession order. If you have a problem with it, you need to call the leasing company." He turned his back on Andre and started attaching a heavy chain to the undercarriage of the BMW. The sound of metal clanking against metal was like a physical blow. "Hey, get your hands off my car!" Andre shouted, his voice cracking with rage. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so much he could barely unlock it. He found the number for the leasing company and jabbed the screen. Brittany was going to be late for her spa day. He was going to be late for his meeting. This was a disaster. After an excruciatingly long series of automated menus, A calm female voice finally answered. Premier Executive Leasing, this is Sarah speaking. How can I help you? My name is Andre Covington, he said through gritted teeth. You have made a massive mistake. You sent a tow truck to repossess my car, a BMW 7 Series. I need you to call it off right now. There was a moment of silence filled only by the sound of furious typing. I see your account, Mr. Covington, Sarah said, her voice perfectly polite and completely unhelpful. Yes, the BMW 7 Series. It looks like the repossession order was issued this morning at 8:05 a.m. I know it was issued. I'm telling you it's a mistake, Andre was practically shouting into the phone. The tow truck driver was now lowering the lift, preparing to hoist the front wheels of his beautiful car off the ground. I'm not seeing any mistake in the system, sir, Sarah continued, her tone unchanging. The lease agreement was terminated by the owner of the vehicle, Covington Holdings, LLC. I've never heard of Covington Holdings, he yelled. The lease is through my company, AC Tech Solutions. I can see that AC Tech Solutions was the authorized user, sir, she said calmly. But Covington Holdings, LLC is the legal owner and lessor of the vehicle. As the owner, they have the right to terminate the lease at any time per Section 4, Paragraph B of your agreement. We are simply the administrators. His mind was reeling. It made no sense. He felt a wave of dizziness. This is insane. Put me through to someone at Covington Holdings, then I'll clear this up. I'm sorry, sir, Sarah said, and for the first time he detected a note of finality in her voice. We don't have a public contact number for that entity. All communications are handled through their legal representatives. We have fulfilled our legal obligation by acting on their request. This matter is now closed on our end. Closed. It's not closed. The front wheels of the BMW were now off the ground. The car, his symbol of power and success, was hanging there, helpless and pathetic. Is there anything else I can help you with today, Mr. Covington? Sarah asked, as if she were asking if he wanted fries with his order. He was speechless. The injustice of it all choked him. He heard a click, and the line went dead. She had hung up on him. He looked up from his phone, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. The tow truck driver was in his cab, starting the engine. The powerful diesel engine roared to life, drowning out all other sound. Andre was left standing there in his $1,000 suit and his shiny Italian shoes, utterly powerless. He watched as the truck slowly, carefully pulled his car out of the parking spot. He watched it being dragged backwards up the ramp, its rear wheels scraping meekly against the concrete. He watched as the symbol of his entire identity was hauled out of his private garage and into the harsh light of day, disappearing from his life forever. The yellow lights flashed one last time before the truck turned the corner, and then there was only silence. He was left alone in the garage with an empty parking space and the faint smell of diesel fumes. The first pillar of his world had just been violently ripped away. If the loss of his car on Monday was the first tremor, the main earthquake was scheduled for Tuesday morning. The second domino was not about status. It was about power. It was about money. I spent my morning peacefully reading a book on my porch, but I knew that across town, my son's world was being systematically dismantled, starting with the most public of humiliations. Andre arrived at the gleaming glass tower that housed his office nearly an hour late. He was flustered and furious, having been forced to take a $100 Uber across town during rush hour. He was determined to project an air of calm control to show his employees that nothing was wrong. His first stop was the artisan coffee shop in the lobby of his building, a place where he was a well-known regular. He always made a show of it, buying coffee and pastries for his executive team, a king dispensing favors to his court. He strode to the counter, cutting in front of the line with a dismissive wave. "Morning, Chloe," he said to the young barista. "The usual for the team, 6 large lattes, 4 cappuccinos, and a box of your best pastries. Put it on the AC Tech account." He handed her the sleek black corporate credit card. It was a card with no spending limit, a symbol of his absolute authority. The barista smiled and ran the card. A moment later, her smile faltered. An awkward beep echoed from the machine. "I'm sorry, Mr. Covington," she said, her voice a little too loud in the suddenly quiet cafe. "It's been declined." Andre stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "What? That's impossible. Run it again. Your machine is probably acting up." She ran it again. The same beep, the same apologetic look. "Declined," she repeated. People in the line behind him were starting to stare, their morning routines interrupted by this small, delicious drama. He could feel their eyes on him. He, Andre Covington, the tech wonderkind, couldn't buy a round of coffee. His face turned a deep, blotchy red. "This is ridiculous," he hissed, snatching the card back. "There must be an issue with the bank's network." He fumbled for his personal wallet, a desperate attempt to save face. He pulled out a handful of cash, all he had on him, and slammed it on the counter. "Here, keep the change." He turned on his heel and stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving the box of pastries and the tray of unmade coffees behind. He didn't want them anymore. The gesture of generosity had become a badge of shame. He rode the elevator up to his office on the 30th floor, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. His office was a corner suite with glass walls, a fishbowl for the whole company to see their leader at work. He sat down heavily in his ergonomic chair, the anger giving way to a cold knot of anxiety in his stomach. He needed to fix this. Now. He opened his laptop and navigated to the company's internal financial portal. This was his dashboard, his control panel. From here he could see everything: cash flow, payroll, expenditures. He typed in his username and password. A red line of text appeared on the screen: "Access denied." He blinked. He must have mistyped. He entered his credentials again slowly this time, making sure each keystroke was perfect. Access denied. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. This wasn't a glitch. This was a lockout. He, the CEO, the founder, was being barred from his own company's finances. He frantically clicked on the "Forgot Password" link, but the system returned another error: user profile not found. Please contact your system administrator. He was the system administrator. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in his chest. His breathing became shallow. He was trapped on the outside of his own creation. Just then, a notification popped up in the corner of his screen. A new email. The sender was an address he didn't recognize: Director at AC Tech Solutions. The subject was "Urgent Notice of Financial Restructuring." With a trembling hand, he clicked it open. The email was a masterpiece of cold corporate jargon. It was impersonal, emotionless, and utterly terrifying. To whom it may concern, it began. Please be advised that as of 9:00 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the majority shareholders of AC Tech Solutions have initiated a comprehensive corporate restructuring. Under this directive, all executive-level access to financial accounts, corporate credit lines, and expenditure authorizations has been temporarily suspended, pending a full audit and review. All non-essential spending, including vendor contracts and consulting fees, is hereby frozen effective immediately. Further instructions will be provided in due course. It was signed simply, "The Office of the Directorate." Majority shareholders. The phrase echoed in his head. Who were they? He had always thought of the California VC firm as silent partners, happy to let him run the show as long as the numbers looked good. He had been wrong. They were not silent. And they had just stripped him of all his power without so much as a phone call. As he sat there staring at the screen, his world shrinking to the 4 glass walls of his office, his phone rang. The screen displayed Richard's name. For a second he thought about ignoring it, but the habit of seeking his mentor's approval was too strong. He answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Richard, hey." The voice on the other end was not the smooth, confident purr of the winner he knew. It was high-pitched, strained, and filled with raw panic. "Andre, what in God's name is going on? My monthly consulting fee, it didn't deposit. It's never late. I have payments due, Andre. The mortgage on the lake house, the payment on Brenda's new car. It's all automated." Andre felt the floor drop out from under him. The consulting fees, the email, it was all connected. I don't know, Richard." He stammered the lie, tasting like acid. "There seem to be some technical issues with the banking system here." "Technical issues?" Richard shrieked, his voice cracking. "My entire business. My only business is my contract with you. You told me this was a long-term secure partnership. You told me you were in control. You need to fix this, Andre. You need to fix this right now." The man he had called a winner, the role model he had praised just days before, sounded like a terrified child. Andre, who was used to receiving guidance from this man, was now being screamed at for answers he didn't have. "I'm trying, Richard," he said, his voice weak. "I'm looking into it." "Looking into it isn't good enough," Richard yelled. "My reputation is on the line. Brenda is asking me questions. What am I supposed to tell her? That her brilliant son can't even manage his own company's payroll?" The call ended with Richard hanging up in a rage, leaving Andre in a ringing silence. He was a king who had just discovered his castle was made of sand. He had no status, no power, and the one man he looked up to had just been exposed as a fragile dependent. He leaned forward and put his head in his hands, the gleaming city of Atlanta, visible through his glass walls, a world that suddenly felt 1,000,000 miles away. The second pillar had not just been removed, it had been pulverized, and he was standing in the dust. Wednesday was the day the final foundation was to be pulled out from under him. While I spent the day quietly sketching a new design for a community library, the third and final act of my son's education was being set in motion. The first blow had taken his status. The second had taken his power. This one was designed to take his sanctuary. Andre came home that evening a broken man. He had spent the day in his glass-walled office, a prisoner on display. He had been forced to cancel meetings, to dodge calls from vendors, and to endure the pitying, curious stares of his own employees. He had no car, no money, and no answers. The penthouse, once his triumphant fortress in the sky, was the only thing he had left. He walked through the door, hoping to find some comfort, some refuge from the nightmare his life had become. Instead, he found Brittany. She was not the bubbly, supportive wife he had left that morning. She was a storm cloud of anxiety and terror pacing the vast living room like a caged animal. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She had clearly been on the phone all day hearing the whispers, the rumors. The news of his public humiliation at the coffee shop had spread like wildfire through their social circle. Her spa day had been a parade of concerned friends asking questions she couldn't answer. "Andre, what is happening?" she cried the moment he walked in, her voice shrill. "My credit card was declined at the salon, my personal card. The one you pay for, they said the account was frozen. I had to use my emergency debit card. I have never been so embarrassed in my entire life." Andre didn't have the energy to fight. He dropped his briefcase by the door, the sound echoing in the cavernous, silent apartment. "I don't know, Brittany," he said, his voice hollow. "There's some kind of hostile takeover happening. The investors, they've locked me out of everything. I'm trying to fix it. Trying to fix it," she shrieked, her voice rising with hysteria. "Our friends are calling me Andre. They're asking what's wrong. Jessica heard from someone at your office that you're being forced out. Is that true? Are you losing your own company?" Before he could answer, there was a sharp, authoritative knock on the door. It wasn't the gentle tap of a neighbor or the buzz of a delivery. It was a sound that demanded to be answered. Brittany froze her eyes wide with fear. Andre, his heart pounding, walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A man stood there in a crisp gray suit. He didn't recognize him. He looked like a lawyer or a banker. He looked like bad news. Reluctantly, Andre opened the door. "Good evening," the man said, his voice polite but devoid of warmth. "Are you Andre Covington?" "Yes," Andre said, his own voice sounding weak in his ears. "Who are you?" "My name is Mr. Harrison. I'm the new senior property manager for the Oakwood." The man offered no handshake. He held a large manila envelope in his hand. "The new property manager?" Andre asked, confused. "What happened to Frank?" "Mr. Albright is no longer with the property management firm," Harrison said smoothly. "There has been a change in ownership. May I come in for a moment?" He didn't wait for an answer, stepping past Andre into the marble entryway as if he owned the place. And in a way he did. Brittany stood by the window, wrapping her arms around herself, watching the scene unfold with a look of pure dread. Mr. Harrison's eyes swept across the apartment, taking in the designer furniture, the expensive art, the sweeping views of the city. He seemed completely unimpressed. "This is a lovely apartment, Mr. Covington," he said, his tone suggesting the exact opposite. "A premium unit, which is why it's so unfortunate that we have to discuss the matter of your tenancy." He opened the manila envelope and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I am here to serve you with this," he said, holding out the document. "It is a formal notice of lease termination." Andre stared at the paper, then at the man's impassive face. He felt a strange floating sensation, as if this were happening to someone else. "Lease termination? What are you talking about?" "Our lease is paid up for the year. We have a special arrangement." "Ah, yes. The employee incentive lease, Mr. Harrison said, a slight condescending smile touching his lips. "I have a copy of it right here. A very generous arrangement indeed. A $0 monthly rent for a high-value executive tenant. However, the lease is quite specific. I'll direct you to Section 7, Clause C." He tapped a highlighted paragraph on the document in his hand. The lease is explicitly contingent upon your continued employment with an affiliated company, in this case AC Tech Solutions. It has come to our attention as the property owners that you are no longer employed there in a capacity that qualifies you for this incentive program. I haven't been fired, Andre insisted, his voice rising in desperation. My access has been suspended. It's a temporary situation. Our legal department disagrees, Mr. Harrison said, his voice like ice. They have received official notification from the Directorate of AC Tech Solutions that your employment status has been fundamentally altered. As such, your lease is in breach of contract. The property owners are exercising their right to terminate the agreement. He finally handed the papers to Andre. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. That is by 5 p.m. on Friday. 72 hours. The words hung in the air, deadly and absolute. Andre looked down at the document in his hand. It was cold, official, and filled with legal language he didn't understand. But he understood the conclusion. They were being kicked out. That's when Brittany finally broke. A choked, guttural sob escaped her lips. No, she whispered. No, no, no. The whisper grew into a wail. Vacate. Where are we supposed to go? All our things are here. My clothes. My shoes. This is our home. She turned on Andre. Her face twisted with a mixture of fear and pure rage. You did this, she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at him. You did this with your arrogance, your stupid fight with your father. You ruined everything. Brittany, stop it, Andre pleaded, but his words were drowned out by her hysteria. Stop it. I will not stop it. I gave up my career for you. I moved into this apartment for you. I built my entire life around your success, and you've thrown it all away because you couldn't just be a decent son. What are my parents going to say? What am I going to tell my friends that we're homeless? Mr. Harrison watched the domestic drama unfold with the detached interest of a scientist observing insects. My work here is done, he said, turning to leave. A moving crew can be recommended if you require one. Please ensure all personal belongings are removed by the deadline. Any items left behind will be considered abandoned and will be disposed of. Good evening. He walked out, closing the door softly behind him, leaving them in the ruins of their beautiful, empty life. The silence that followed Brittany's sobs was more terrifying than the shouting. Andre stood there, the eviction notice clutched in his hand. His eyes scanned the document, searching for a loophole, a mistake, anything. And then he saw it. At the bottom of the page, under the signature of Mr. Harrison, was a line of small print. This notice is served on behalf of the legal property owners, Oakwood Properties, LLC. Oakwood Properties, another name he didn't recognize, another invisible force controlling his life. A car repossessed by Covington Holdings, a company seized by anonymous shareholders, a home taken by Oakwood Properties. It was a coordinated attack. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a hostile takeover. This was personal. And in that moment of absolute despair, as he stood in the home he no longer owned with the wife who now hated him, stripped of his car and his money, a lifetime of resentment and denial finally coalesced into a single burning point of rage. There was only one person who could be behind this. One person who was quiet enough, clever enough, and he now realized ruthless enough to orchestrate such a complete and total destruction. The person he had dismissed as a failure. His hands shook as he pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't think about what he would say. He was past thinking. He was a cornered animal, and he was going to lash out at his tormentor. He found the number he hadn't called in over a week and hit dial. It rang once, twice. Then he heard the calm, familiar voice on the other end. Hello? The sound of his father's voice, so steady and untroubled, broke the last of his restraint. You, Andre snarled into the phone, his voice a venomous whisper. You did this. All of it. The car, the company, the apartment. This was you, wasn't it? He wasn't asking a question. He was making an accusation. He heard a long silence on the other end of the line. It was the same silence from the restaurant, the same silence from the weekend. But now it wasn't a silence of weakness. It was the silence of absolute power. When my voice finally came, it was quiet, but it carried the weight of an anvil. Andre, I said, I think it's time we had a talk. He arrived less than 30 minutes later. I heard the sound of a cheap Uber pulling up, the kind with a rattling engine and a driver who was talking too loudly on his phone, a far cry from the silent electric purr of his BMW. I didn't go to the door. I simply waited in my study, the same room where I had launched the protocol that had systematically erased his life. I heard the doorbell ring, a frantic, impatient jab. I let it ring again before I used the intercom on my desk. "The door is open, Andre. Come to the study." He stormed in, not with the confidence of a CEO, but with the blustering rage of a cornered child. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie was loosened, and his face was pale and slick with a sheen of desperate sweat. He stood in the doorway of my small study, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for the hidden levers of his destruction. He looked at the old oak desk, the shelves overflowing with books on engineering and history, the framed blueprints on the wall. For the first time in his life, he was seeing this room not as his father's dusty, boring hobby space, but as it truly was, the command center. I was sitting in my worn leather chair behind the desk. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I simply watched him, my hands folded calmly on the desk's surface. In this room on my territory, I was the one with the power. The silence stretched thick and heavy. I let it hang in the air, forcing him to be the one to break it. "How could you?" he finally burst out, his voice a ragged mess of anger and disbelief. "How could you do this to me, to your own son, to your family? You've destroyed everything, everything I've ever worked for. The phrase was so absurd, so completely detached from reality that I almost laughed. But this was not a time for laughter. This was a time for cold, hard lessons. I looked at the man standing before me, this man-child who had built his entire identity on a foundation of my money and his own lies. He wasn't a supplicant, not yet. He was still too proud, too angry. He hadn't come here to apologize. He had come here to demand that I fix the world he had broken. I let his words echo and die in the quiet room. I didn't respond to his accusations. I didn't engage with his drama. I simply gestured to the simple wooden chair opposite my desk. "Sit down." "Andre," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying an authority he had never heard from me before. "The yelling is over. You've had your say. Now it's time for you to listen." He sat. The anger hadn't left his face, but it was now mixed with a confused, fearful apprehension. It was the look of a man who senses the ground is about to give way beneath him, but doesn't know why. I didn't give him time to gather his thoughts or formulate another accusation. I simply swiveled the large monitor on my desk to face him. The screen was blank except for a single folder in the center labeled simply, "The Foundation." "You said you worked for everything you have." I began, my voice as calm and steady as a surveyor's hand. "That's a commendable sentiment. So, let's review your work. Let's start with your greatest achievement. AC Tech Solutions." I clicked open the folder. A series of legal documents appeared neatly organized. "Do you remember 6 years ago when you pitched your idea to those venture capitalists in California, Innovate Future Group?" He nodded slowly, a flicker of his old pride in his eyes. "They saw my potential. They believed in my vision." "They did," I agreed, "because I instructed them to." I clicked on a document titled Innovate Future Group Incorporation. The articles of incorporation were clearly displayed. I pointed to the section listing the primary shareholder. "Innovate Future Group is a shell corporation, Andre. It was created by my lawyer, Alicia Warren, for the sole purpose of funding your company. And as you can see, it is wholly owned by an anonymous trust based in Delaware." His eyes narrowed, struggling to understand. "A trust? What trust?" I opened the next file, Covington Family Trust Declaration. My name was listed as the sole grantor and trustee. His name was listed as a potential beneficiary, but with no controlling rights. "This trust," I said quietly. "My trust. I didn't want to just give you the money. I wanted you to feel like you had earned it. So I created a stage for you with actors and props, but you seem to have mistaken the stage for reality." I then opened the final document in that section, the AC Tech Solutions Shareholder Agreement. My finger traced the line item showing Innovate Future Group's 60% controlling stake. "You don't own your company, Andre," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "You are its chief employee. You have a 20% stake, a generous gift, but one that leaves you with no actual power. The majority shareholders, the board of directors, you've never met. That's me. You're not building a company, Andre. You're playing in a sandbox I built for you." He was shaking his head, a gesture of pure denial. No, that's not possible." I built it. I didn't argue. I simply moved on to the next exhibit. Let's talk about your car. Or rather, my car. I closed the company folder and opened a new one labeled Assets. The lease agreement for the BMW 7 Series filled the screen. You told me you needed it to project success, a noble goal. But your personal credit wasn't strong enough, was it? So the company leased it for you. It was a corporate expense, he said weakly, grasping at straws. Not exactly, I corrected him. Your company doesn't have the credit for a vehicle like that either. The lease, as you can see, is not with AC Tech. It's with a different company. I highlighted the name at the top of the contract. Covington Holdings, LLC, another one of my companies. You were listed as an authorized user and employee perk. You didn't earn that car, Andre. You were permitted to drive it. And when your behavior no longer merited that perk, the permission was revoked. It's that simple. He looked as if he had been physically struck. The symbol of his status, the very machine that announced his arrival as a winner, was just a hand-me-down from the father he scorned. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I was relentless. I moved to the next folder. And then there's the penthouse. Your castle in the sky. I opened a file containing the deed to the Oakwood building. The owner was listed clearly, Oakwood Properties, LLC. I then brought up the incorporation papers for that LLC. Again, my name was the only one on it. You told me about that apartment, I said, my voice softening slightly, a calculated move to make the blow land harder. You said it was perfect, but just out of your price range. You were right. It was. You couldn't afford it. In fact, no one can rent that particular unit. But the lease, he stammered. The employee incentive lease? There is no such thing, I said flatly. That was a fiction, a story created by the property management firm that works for me to make you feel special. The truth is much simpler. I bought that entire building 3 years ago as an investment. You weren't a high-profile tenant. You were my son living rent-free in my house. You weren't a resident, Andre. You were a guest, and your behavior was no longer welcome. The blood had drained from his face. He was staring at the screen at the irrefutable black and white proof of his entire fraudulent life. Every pillar he had used to define himself, his company, his car, his home, was an illusion I had created. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. The anger finally extinguished, replaced by something much worse, utter humiliation. But I wasn't finished. There was one more piece, the keystone that held the entire rotten arch together. You called me a loser, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. And you called Richard Lawson a winner. You looked up to him. You called him a role model. Let's talk about your role model. I opened the final folder. It was labeled simply, Consulting. Inside was a single document, a contract between AC Tech Solutions and Richard Lawson Consulting. I scrolled down to the payment schedule, a recurring monthly payment of $50,000. Richard is a business consultant, I explained. And a consultant needs clients. Did you ever wonder why he never talked about his other clients? Why his only business seemed to be giving you advice? Andre stared at the numbers on the screen. He knew them well. He was the one who authorized the payments. That $50,000 monthly fee. That's his only income. Andre, your company is his only client. And since your company is funded entirely by my money, I let the sentence hang in the air, letting him connect the final devastating dots himself. His eyes went wide. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He actually recoiled in his chair. The winner you admire so much? I continued, my voice calm and precise. The man your mother left me for the man who lives in a big house and drives a fancy car and lectures me on ambition. His entire lifestyle is funded by me. I pay his mortgage. I pay for your mother's new car. The money flows from my trust through your company and directly into his pocket. The winner your mother chose is on the payroll of the loser she left behind. That was it. That was the final blow. He made a small choking sound. The entire edifice of his life, his success, his heroes and villains, his identity, it all came crashing down in the silence of that small, dusty room. He finally understood. He wasn't a player in the game. He wasn't even a piece on the board. He was just the ball passed between hands, and he had never even known it. I leaned back in my chair and closed the laptop. The presentation was over. I didn't take anything from you, Andre, I said, my voice now gentle, the lesson delivered. I simply took back what was mine, A loser has to manage his assets carefully, you see. Now, for the first time in your adult life, you have the opportunity to become a real winner, all on your own. I stood up and walked out of the room, leaving him alone with the wreckage. I looked at my son, truly looked at him for the first time in what felt like a decade. The arrogant CEO was gone. The resentful child was gone. All that was left was a broken man sitting in a simple wooden chair in a dusty old study, stripped bare of all his illusions. There was no victory for me in this moment, only a deep, profound sorrow for the years we had lost for the boy who had gotten so lost inside the man. This final act was not about punishment, it was about purpose. He needed to understand why. I know this is hard to understand right now, Andre. I began, my voice softer now, the sharp edges of the lawyer and the strategist falling away, leaving only the father. And I know you hate me. You have every right to. But I need you to listen very carefully. This was never about destroying you. It was about destroying the lie you were living in. The man at that dinner table, that wasn't my son. That was a hollow shell, a puppet built from my money, and Richard's empty words, and your mother's obsession with appearances. I gestured around the room to the evidence of a life built with hands, not just with money. You've been living on a stage, Andre, playing the part of a successful man. All I did was take down the set. What you're feeling right now, this fear, this humiliation, this gut-wrenching emptiness, it's the first real thing you've felt in a very long time. This is the foundation. This is ground zero. This is where a man begins to build a life, not just pretend to have one. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading, perhaps expecting me to offer him a lifeline to tell him this was all just a temporary lesson. I offered him none. The trust I created for you still exists, I told him. Your name is still in it, but you will not see another dime of my money, not until you have proven you can build something of your own. Go get a job, Andre. A real job, not a title. It doesn't matter if it's waiting tables or working construction. Pay rent on an apartment you can actually afford, not one you can show off. Learn the value of $1 that you have earned with sweat and exhaustion. Learn humility. Learn respect. And most importantly, learn who you are when you have nothing. I stood up the old leather of my chair, groaning in protest. Maybe one day, years from now, you'll become the man I always hoped you'd be. Not a winner by Richard's definition, but a man of substance, a builder. A man who understands that his worth is not in what he owns, but in who he is. Until that day, you are on your own. With that, I slowly and deliberately closed the lid of my laptop. The soft click echoed in the silent room. It was the sound of a door closing, a chapter ending. The presentation was over. The lesson had been delivered. I turned and walked out of the study, leaving my son alone with the truth. I didn't look back. There was nothing more to say. I left Andre in the study, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. I didn't know where he went after that. I didn't ask. My part in that chapter of his life was over. The lesson had been delivered. Whether he learned from it or not was now entirely up to him. The days that followed were the quietest I had known in 30 years. The house felt lighter, as if a great oppressive weight had been lifted from its very foundations. There were no frantic phone calls, no passive-aggressive text messages, no manufactured family dramas that required my silent financial intervention. There was only peace. A week later, I was sitting on my back porch as evening settled over the neighborhood. The Georgia air was warm and thick with the scent of jasmine from the vine climbing the trellis beside me. I held a cool glass of iced tea, the condensation dripping onto the worn wooden armrest of my rocking chair. The chair moved back and forth in a slow, steady rhythm, a cadence of contentment. I wasn't waiting for anything. I wasn't anticipating a call or worrying about a problem. I was simply present. For the first time in years, my mind was not occupied with my son's manufactured crises or my ex-wife's insatiable desire for more. I was alone, but I was not lonely. The silence was not the silence of absence, but the silence of serenity. I thought about the word Andre had used at that dinner, the word that had set all of this in motion: loser. For years, I had allowed that unspoken accusation to define the terms of my existence. I had poured my life's work, my intelligence, and my fortune into a bottomless pit of his and his mother's ego, all in a desperate, misguided attempt to prove I wasn't what they thought I was. I had sacrificed my own peace to fund their chaotic lives. But sitting there listening to the crickets begin their nightly chorus, I realized the truth. I had never been the loser. I had been the host for a parasite. And now, I was finally free. I had completed my final project. It was not a bridge of steel or a building of concrete. It was the careful, painful demolition of a toxic family structure. And now, in its place, there was room for something new to grow. I didn't know what the future held for my relationship with my son, but I knew my own future was finally mine. The sudden jarring ring of my cell phone on the small table beside me felt like a violation of that newfound peace. I looked at the screen. It was Brenda. I almost didn't answer. I had nothing left to say to her, but some part of me, a lingering curiosity, perhaps wanted to see the final act of this play. I let it ring a few more times, a small assertion of my new boundaries, before I picked it up. I pressed the button and held the phone to my ear but said nothing. For a moment, all I heard was ragged, frantic breathing. Then her voice came through a torrent of raw, unfiltered panic. It was not the voice of the poised, condescending woman from the restaurant. It was the desperate shriek of someone whose world was on fire. Reggie. Reggie. Thank God. You have to do something. You have to help us. I remained silent, letting her words rush into the void. It's Richard, she cried, her voice cracking with a sob that held no sadness, only terror. He's ruined. It's all gone. The consulting contract with Andre's company. It was everything. They terminated it. We got a notice from the bank this morning. They're foreclosing on the house. The lake house, Reggie. They're taking our house. I listened. My expression unchanged. I took a slow sip of my iced tea. And the car, my Mercedes. Richard leased it and the payments were tied to his business account. They're going to take it back. I have nothing. Reggie, do you hear me? Nothing. I went to the country club today and my membership was suspended. I can't live like this. This is not my life. Her voice rose to a hysterical pitch. This is your fault, all of it. This is because of what you did. You were jealous of Richard, jealous of Andre's success, so you decided to destroy all of us. How could you be so cruel after everything we had, after all our years together? I am the mother of your son. It was a stunning performance. In her version of reality, she was the victim. Richard was the victim. Their extravagant, debt-fueled lifestyle was something they were entitled to, and I was the villain for turning off the faucet that had supplied it all. There was no apology for what had been said at the dinner. There was no concern for Andre's well-being. There was only a desperate, selfish demand that I put her world back together. She hadn't changed. She never would. And in that moment, I felt the last lingering chain of obligation to her turn to dust and blow away in the evening breeze. She was still ranting, her words blurring into a meaningless stream of accusations and pleas. You have to fix this, Reggie. You have to call those people the ones who own Andre's company. You have to tell them to reinstate the contract. You have the money. You always have the money. You owe us that much. You owe me. I let her finally run out of steam. The silence that followed was heavy with her expectant, desperate breathing. She was waiting for me to give in, to do what I had always done, quietly clean up the mess. I let the silence stretch long and uncomfortable. I listened to the crickets. I watched a firefly blink in the growing darkness. I savored the feeling of my own unshakable peace. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet, calm, and utterly final. It held no anger, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. It was simply a statement of a new and permanent truth. Brenda, I said, that is no longer my problem. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need to hear her shock, her rage, or her pleas. The conversation was over. A conversation that had been going on for 30 years was finally mercifully over. I pressed the end call button on the screen and placed the phone face down on the table. Then I leaned back in my rocking chair. The slow, steady rhythm returned. The scent of jasmine filled the air. The stars were beginning to appear in the deep purple sky, distant and beautiful and indifferent. I had reclaimed my dignity. I had reclaimed my peace. I had reclaimed my life. And in the profound, perfect silence of that Georgia evening, I finally felt like a winner. This painful chapter taught me a lesson that took 72 years to fully understand. For too long, I had confused financial support with fatherly love, and in doing so, I allowed my patience to be seen as weakness. I thought that by providing a safety net, I was helping my son, but I was only enabling a boy to live in a man's world without any of the responsibility. I have learned that true strength is not found in endless giving, but in the courage to set firm boundaries. And sometimes the most profound act of love is to take everything away, forcing someone to stand on the cold, hard foundation of reality so they can finally learn to build a life for themselves. I'm truly curious to hear your thoughts, so tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place?